Greetings, everyone, and welcome. My name is Onika Young, and I have pursued a Bachelor of Arts degree in Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management. I also have a minor in Integrated Marketing Communications, and I have a master's degree in Development Studies from the University of the West Indies, and I'm currently an MPhil student, hoping to upgrade to PhD level very soon. Choosing the University of the West Indies and stepping into the ICS community means transforming from a consumer of culture into a curator of legacy. Here, we recognize that the Caribbean isn't just a destination, it is a global powerhouse of ideas. As students, we look at our music, fashion, and creative expressions not merely as entertainment, but as living archives and serious intellectual property. If you want to be a visionary who shapes international cultural policy, protects regional heritage, and drives the global creative economy, you need to understand the structural history behind our brilliance. We are inviting you to join us at the Institute because this is where raw cultural passion meets unapologetic academic rigor. Come sharpen your scholarly skills, honor our past, and build the future with us. Once again, I am Onika Young, a proud UWI scholar and graduate, a student from the Institute of Caribbean Studies, an MPhil/PhD student.
The Creative Frequency podcast is brought to you by the Institute of Caribbean Studies, ICS, under the umbrella of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, MONA. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you can catch us. Thank you for joining us while we explore Jamaica's cultural and creative industries. My name is Rachel Ann Fenderson.
And I'm Radhika Myers. Together we are R Squared,
the co-host of the Creative Frequency podcast. Okay, Radhika, so you know that I love 90s dancehall, my favorite. I love it, live it, can't get enough of it. Also 2000s, I'm in it. Tell me, what are some of your favorite songs overall?
All right, some of my favorite music, of course, it definitely has to come out of gospel, creative Christian at large. So I would definitely say, I would have said this previously, but Prince Saj is doing some amazing dance. I call it dancehall gospel. And you know, when we hear it, we just get rump up like, yeah, we're going to step faster enemy today. So I definitely say I love Prince Saj's music. I also love what John Mark Wigan is doing. And of course, anything Kevin Downswell is definitely my cup of tea. And reggae in its full essence. Reggae? Can't go wrong with a good, nice reggae music. How about you?
Okay. So if we're going to say dancehall songs, easy. So I love Tati by Snugglepuss. I love Position by Terra Fabulous. Coca-Cola Body Shape, Simpleton, yes. Bati Rider by Buju. No Matter Me by Lady Saw. And Press Trigger by Mad Cobra. That's actually one of my favorite songs. Yeah, a press trigger and a press people button.
Yeah. Big up Minister Marion Hall now, formerly known as Lady Saw. And speaking about Minister Marion Hall, you see that song where she said, "There's a room in my house reserved for Jesus." Clock it. Yes,
Amen.
yes.
Amen. So speaking of Lady Saw, and so for me, I can just name off my top 5 or 6. And of course, they're coming out of 90s dancehall. So for me, of course, Lady Saw, Tanya Stevens, Sasha, Elephant Man, Mad Cobra, as I just mentioned, Beanie Man, and Tonto Metro Devante. So tell me, who are yours?
For dancehall?
Dancehall, period.
I know.
Or persons that you have
all right.
liked over a period of time.
When I was out in the world, because there's a past, I really loved Vibes Cartel. Like, I was a Cartel fan. True and
Boom.
true. Like, true lyricist. Like, to this day, I said that. Looking back at my past and loving Cartel is because he's a true lyricist. Like,
100%.
Lyrics top notch, on point, lyrically inclined. Listen, like, Cartel, yeah, man. I loved him back in those days. Yeah.
Back in those days. And yeah, so vibes, yeah, 2000s, understand it. Love vibes down. Like even today, like what I would say, like for me, I love vibes in love music. I love when he's in love, you know? Like he has a very particular line that I can never get out of my head. And it's when he says that he wants to decorate the house with laughter. That is such a sweet way to tell a woman you want to have children with her.
I can pick up him new single. I mean, say God and time, long time. I mean, say I can get behind that. And if we're gonna talk about dancehall, we can't leave Spice out of the conversation. Like that lady,
Come on, Spice.
That lady, like the way how she performs, I can appreciate her art. Like I think she took in this new age, she's showing female artists that listen, it's not just about the voice, it's not just about the lyrics, but how you command that stage. And she does that so well. Like when you know say a Spice gonna come out, you're looking for a full production. So you can't talk about dance and talk about Spice.
So, right. So, like, even when you and I are talking about the different artists, and I mentioned artists from the 90s, and we're heading into the 2000s, and it just like shows like the growth of dancehall and how dancehall from those ages and those persons would have birthed, like, let's say, Vibes Cartel and Spice and Skilly Bang, Skang. Who else? Who are some others? Massacre. Who else? Alkaline.
Well, Jada,
Aldonia.
Shensia.
Yeah.
The Chanel Muir. Yeah.
Oh, yes, girl. Write it. Or vibes. Love it. Okay, let's get right into the interview, listeners. Exemplar of culture, Mr. Mark Golding, attorney, investment banker, music producer, and political leader. Today on the Creative Frequency Podcast, we welcome a true multi-hyphenate visionary whose career defies traditional boundaries, seamlessly bridging the worlds of high finance, commercial law, national politics, and Jamaican music culture. Mr. Mark Golding. While many know him as a leading Jamaican attorney, an Oxford, Norman Manley Law School, and the University of London educated legal scholar, as well as a prominent investment banker who co-founded pioneering financial institutions like Dehring Bunting and Golding and Proven Investments Limited. He is also the senior partner of HART, MUIRHEAD, and FATTA, one of Jamaica's leadership law firms. Mr. Golding's trajectory has always been deeply intertwined with the heartbeat of Caribbean creativity. His entry into the music business actually began during his days as a law student in the 1980s, when he stepped into the role of content promoter, organizing a major live show featuring legendary reggae acts, including Gregory Isaacs, Beres Hammond, and Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers. That early passion evolved into a serious creative pursuit in the late 1990s when he partnered with Ray Hitchens to form the independent music label and production house, Riverside Music. Far from a silent investor, Mr. Golding possessed a deep, wide-ranging knowledge of reggae and the immersive love of DJs and dancehall culture. As a lyricist and producer, Mr. Golding developed a unique ability to write specifically for the voice and persona of the artists he collaborated with. His approach was built on genuine human connection, vibing with new artists, getting to know them deeply, and using the authentic interest to break the ice in the studio. This collaborative chemistry birthed award-winning music. Riverside went on to secure Jamaica Music Awards for both production and song arranging. Under the stewardship, the label worked with Toots Hibbert, Richie Stevens, Cheryl Lee Ralph, Brian and Tony Gold, Nadine Sutherland, Cindy Breakspear, Buccaneer, Chris Bentley of Inner Circle, Monty Alexander, Della Manley, and more.
Recognizing the structural vulnerabilities facing local creatives, Mr. Golding routinely leveraged his unique dual expertise to champion creators, providing critical legal guidance and financial backing to help artists navigate the business side of their careers. Beyond the studio, Mr. Golding's legislative legacy is fundamentally tied to the cultural and social transformation. As Jamaica's Minister of Justice 2012 to 2016, he guided 121 acts of parliament into law, most notably leading the historic 2015 reformation of the Dangerous Drugs Act, which decriminalized marijuana, a legislative shift with profound implications for the Rastafarian community and the local creative economy. Today, as the leader of the opposition of the People's National Party, he continues to champion the architects of Jamaican culture, repeatedly making headlines for his passionate advocacy in Parliament to officially confer the title of National Hero upon the legendary Bob Marley. Coupled with his ongoing commitment to his family's philanthropic legacy, serving as chairman of the Sir John Golding Rehabilitation Center, formerly known as Mona Rehabilitation Foundation, to advance the welfare of persons living with disabilities, an organization pioneered by his parents, Sir John Golding and Lady Patricia Golding. Mr. Golding embodies the philosophy that true leadership means serving the people, protecting the culture, and honoring the creative spirit. He joins us on the Creative Frequency podcast to discuss his dynamic journey as a creative entrepreneur, the intersection of law and entertainment, and his vision for pushing the Caribbean's cultural industries into an empowered, category-defying future.
Welcome, Mr. Mark Golding.
It's a pleasure to be here. This is not typically how I spend a Friday afternoon, but the opportunity to explore the creativity and what it means and how it manifests is intriguing for me. So I haven't really prepared for this. I'm just coming into it fresh, and let's see where the journey takes us. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming, and I'm certain it will be brilliant. Mr. Golding, you stepped into the music business in the 1980s as a student concert promoter, bringing together icons like Gregory Isaacs and Beres Hammond, my favorite, before diving deep into the 1990s dancehall scene with your label Riverside Music. How do you balance your background in traditional foundational reggae with your deep appreciation for the raw energy of dancehall DJs?
Well, I would say I've always loved both sides of the genre. Growing up, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Burning Spear, Third World, Mighty Diamonds, roots artists generally, that music was all around. But as a teenager, became increasingly interested in dancehall music, Jala of Brigadier Jerry, Kilimanjaro with Super Cat and Early B, Gemini, Youthman Promotion, all those sounds. So I enjoyed going to the dance hall and watching the artists perform live at a time when that was still the common way in which dances flowed. So a song would be played, and then the 45 would be flipped over, and the version, which is just a rhythm track, the resident DJ would nice up the dance with a creative flow of lyrics. I found that very exciting and engaging. So I had an interest in both sides of it. But I've always been quite a musical person. I was in the choir at Mona Prep, and later on I was in school bands, and at university I was in another band. So I've written music from I was in my teenage years, and tried my hand at singing as well throughout that period. So what really happened was when I came back to Jamaica after completing my master's degree and started to practice law, I quickly got very subsumed in that because there was a lot of scope, a lot of opportunity, a lot of work. And I just found a need to balance that type of thinking and that type of creativity, because the type of law I was doing was creative in its own way, but with musical challenge of creativity. And I was very lucky to be introduced by a friend of mine, Peter Melhedo, told me that there was a guy living on his road called Ray Hitchens, who was a musician, had a home studio, and he introduced us. And Ray and I became good friends. We set up Riverside Music. And we co-wrote along with other guest writers who came in and wrote with us and produced a lot of material over a period of, I don't know how many years, maybe 5 to 10 years. And we released 3 albums in that period by different artists. And it was always a really nice balance in my life that I could do this. Typically it was at night, and we would spend hours working on material in the studio. I invested in the studio at that time as well, so we got it up to a higher standard. And, Ray is a very talented musician and a very good studio engineer in his own right, and arranger, producer. So it was a learning experience for me, but it was a co-creative experience with him and many other artists. We worked with Nadine Sutherland, we worked with Richie Stephens, we worked with Dela Manley, we worked with Cindy Breakspeare, a number of artists,
Play your part, drive the pain away, stand up, stand and deliver. You can't hide from the sound of suffering. Stand and deliver. Look beyond your own surroundings. Stand and deliver. The world is one for all to live in. Stand and
So that's just been an important dimension to my life. And I think it helped in my professional career, my non-musical career as well, just to enable me to feel as a more balanced individual than perhaps if I'd just been on the law treadmill 24/7.
So this is actually pretty fascinating. As you're speaking, my brain is starting to wander into the space of dancehall, and I'm envisioning it. So if you could do us a favor, the listeners, take us back to this time and set the scene. Was there a specific moment in 90s dancehall when you realized that this subculture wasn't just a passing trend, but the definitive feature of Jamaican sonic identity?
The dancehall has been a part of Jamaican popular music from at least in the 60s, if not before. And, so growing up, you heard about Kingston and Count Machuki, and those are artists who were before my time, but one was aware of that tradition. And then the great Daddy Uri, working with King Tubby's and all of the electronic effects that became part of the engineering of sound in Jamaica, and then weaving that in with the DJ style of a man like Daddy Roy. Coming off of that, then in the 70s, coming into the 80s, Brigadier Jerry was, I think, one of the top, if not the top, DJ in Jamaica. Everybody rated Briggy. And Jalove was a sound that, was uptown sound and played here at Student Union quite often. Black Star playing in standpipe. And so, I could, without having to go too far afield, because in those days, 13, 14-year-old, I wasn't really supposed to be going too far afield at night and so on. But in the vicinity of where I live, because I lived on College Common on the campus, I was able to expose myself to that. But I think it's when DJs like Supercat, like Early B, Papa San, General Trees, Peter Metro, all of these guys started to come up now, and you had more of them and they were exciting, sometimes it was a bit risque, sexualized lyrics, badman lyrics, cultural lyrics. It was a wide canvas of subject matter. And then, of course, Shabba Rankin came, and then the international recording industry started to take note. And he was signed, Supercat was signed, Patra, Richie Stephens as a dancehall singer, and I knew some of them because, for example, Richie Stephens was a friend of mine now, but I met him really as a lawyer. I was doing some legal work for him. I was doing some legal work with Tough Gang. Got to know Ziggy and Sedella, Steve, at that time as well. So I was kind of around. Cutty Ranks that came to see me. I did some work with him as well, I remember. And so I've always been around the industry in that way, though I never really focused on music law, but I had done intellectual property as one of the courses in my master's degree. Had the theoretical understanding of it, so I was able to apply that as a commercial lawyer to help quite a few of the Jamaican artists at the time. But it was really that set of artists and then those big labels, those big record companies, seeing the power of it. And then people like Heavy D up in the States, right? Because, of course, hip-hop came out of dancehall with
100%.
Cool Herc and, But then you had artists like Heavy D, like Busta Rhymes, you know, who wicked DJs, but doing it through rap, but having the link with Jamaica too, and then creating opportunities for Jamaican artists who would who grew up in Jamaica, made their name locally, but being signed and kind of bust open the whole thing. So that, I would say, in the 90s was when I really recognized the international potential of the dancehall. Before that, it was just the thing that Jamaicans loved at home and abroad as the exciting side of the of the music. You know, the root side is more conscious, philosophical, inspiring, and very, very important. I don't see one as more important than the other, but you know, they both carry their own weight. But that was how I think it kind of evolved into being where, and then later on, of course, you have Shaggy emerging, you have Sean Paul, and then the whole reggaeton thing picking up on our genre. You have the Afrobeats picking up on our genre. So it's just gone, the scale of it is huge, but of course, we've also, to some extent, lost some of our ownership of it then, you know, because others are doing it independently of us now, and we have not really managed to maintain that pace. I would say that we had set a pace in the 90s going into the next decade. I don't think we've maintained that pace in terms of our international presence in the music industry, which is unfortunate.
Right. You know, as you were speaking to the different scenery that you were painting with these artists, I couldn't help but to think of my little 14-year-old self getting off the E train, mommy close ears. And I would go to VP Records on Jamaica Avenue. So I'm from Queens, New York. And VP Records had 2 locations. So I would go and get Strictly the Best. I would buy Reggae Gold and Soca Gold. And that's how I knew about like all the newest, hottest reggae music that was dropping, right? So, of course, I was listening to things like Lady Saw.
Yeah.
Laughed to myself at 14.
Yeah.
And of course, Sean Paul, you know, Sprague Benz. And, you know, so it's interesting of experiencing 90s dancehall. And to this day, I always say 90s dancehall is, to me, the best dancehall. I don't think anything can touch it. It was just so innovative and interesting, and like even like dances that would be associated with it. Like I remember the Brock Up. You know, I remember the prong. I remember the screechy. I remember the sketa. Like I remember all of these different dances associated with that time period. And, you know, I can remember what my little 14-year-old self was doing at that time, dancing to this music and experiencing it in this way.
You mentioned Lady Saw, and that reminds me that after Gilbert, you know, in the months when Kingston kind of laid low by Gilbert, a lot of us didn't have electricity, some never have water. It was a quiet time. But Alden Stewart from the Bloodfire Posse was somebody who I knew. And I started to write some songs. And then Alden took me to New Name Studio on Maxfield Avenue, which was owned by Castro Brown, who was a Jamaican who had made his name in London and had come back. And he was the one, I think, who kind of bust Lady Saw, if my memory serves me correctly.
Really?
She emerged. Yeah, he kind of had identified her as a talent and producer and so on. I did 4 songs down at that. I don't know where those songs are now still, but I did 4 songs with Alden down there in the early 90s. Yeah, and Lady, I remember hearing about Lady Saw, and knowing that Castro was so proud of her, and look at, you know, she then emerged as a phenomenon in their own right.
Queen of the dance hall.
Yeah.
To this day, you know,
True.
I can listen to her music on repeat. You know, I have so many. Matter of fact, do you have any favorite Lady songs that you really like?
Lady Saw songs?
Yes.
Boy, it's hard for me to choose. Did she do Under the Sycamore Tree?
100%. That's one of mine.
Yeah,
Okay, so we have one. We have one in common.
Yes, that's right. You know, and of course, Lady G was another wicked female. I think she and San were related in some. Papa San, you know, Lady G is coming out of Spanish Town, I think, and she was a very good DJ.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there were others, a female, Charmaine, I think. Yeah,
Okay,
Charmaine,
yes.
I did her song about Informers, which was a big hit, you know. And then, of course, Brigide's sister did the Bam Bam,
Yes.
which became a massive international hit, you know, and has been sampled and so on.
100%.
Coming off a Toots tune, you know, which I think, you know, which was a festival song, if I remember serving correctly, the Bam Bam, you know, what a Bam Bam, Bam Bam Dylan.
Yeah. Sister Nancy.
Yeah, Sister
Yes.
Nancy, yes. Brigide's sister.
So my 2, well, so we share one in common, Sycamore Tree.
Yes.
My other one is No Long Talking, and Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I must confess, though, that my knowledge of dancehall music has kind of waned in the more recent years, where it went in a different direction. And I am aware of some of the artists, Yaksta, Masika and them, and before him, Alkaline, and of course the great Cartel, who was a phenomenon as well, and Mavado, I have to respect them,
For sure.
man. And Bujo, of course,
Of course,
yeah.
Buju.
Well, Bujo has been from year to decades, Beanie and Bounty and Bujo.
Transcends generation.
Yeah, they've really stood the test of time. But some of the more recent music, I'm not so knowledgeable about it, But I kind of grew up in that tradition, but was always a lover of roots reggae as well,
Okay.
And you mentioned when I was a law student at Manley Law School, after Gilbert, my brethren Kenny, Oje, and we were driving somewhere in his yellow bug, I remember, and we were on the Spanish Town Road. We turned up to go up Maxfield Avenue, and it was raining very heavily, and it was like a river, and the bug can float, I think. So we turned off onto a side road just to wait for the weather to subside. And in the course of reasoning there, we decided to do a show. And that show, that was my first entrepreneurial experience. We'd put on quite a big show at Cinema 2 with artists like Beres Hammond, Ziggy, Marley and the Melody Makers, Gregory Isaacs, Flower Gun and Ninja Man, a couple other big names to it. But it rained that day, and the show was not a commercial success. I was like 24-year-old or something like that then. So it was a big experience for me to put that together with Kenny. I never attempted to do it again. It was a kind of seminal moment for me to have gone through that experience of trying to put together an event of that size at a relatively young age.
Oh, I kind of wish you would have done it again.
Maybe one day, I don't know. I'm still standing.
Okay. Well, I hope that Radhika and I will be invited.
Wow, definitely. If that ever happens, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, man.
Listeners, it's time for a quick commercial break. We'll chat soon.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dennis Howard, ethnomusicologist and the program coordinator for the Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management BA degree at the University of the West Indies, Mona. The development of our music. Well, it has two phases. The first one, when we started to record mento music. And this was because of a calypso craze that was going on in the United States. Harry Belafonte had released an album called Calypso, which he did folk songs and mento songs and copied two calypso songs. But because America knew Caribbean music as calypso, it was labeled as calypso. So enterprising producers in Jamaica like Stanley Motta and Ivan Chin, they decided to start to do recordings of mento music, but they labeled it calypso music. So that was the first phase. So in the 50s, we had people like Lord Flea, we had Lord Foodos, who was on Elektra label, and Lord Flea was on Capitol Records. So there was a output directed to the United States. Unfortunately, they called it calypso, but it was actually mento. Then the next phase of the development of our music came out of the sound system culture. The sound system culture had started in the 40s, playing rhythm and blues and jump blues and a little mento. And after a while, the music shifted in the United States to rock and roll. But Jamaica was still in tune to the jump blues and the rhythm and blues of the New Orleans type. So that caused our musicians to start recording as specials at first. Started to record Jamaican R&B, as we call it at that time. Invest in the rhythm, but remember, own the rights. This is Dr. Howard for the Creative Frequency Podcast.
That's an excellent analysis on Jamaica's music industry from Dr. Dennis Howard. Now, let's return to the interview. You were a hands-on lyricist who kept an ear to the ground, capturing the latest phrases, slangs, and cultural trends directly from the dance halls. When you sat down in the studio with a new artist, how do you use that genuine curiosity to break the ice and vibe with them?
Yeah, it's very important. if you're collaborating in a songwriting session with an artist, that you have a certain chemistry, a certain rapport, so that you can vibe together and you feed off of each other's energy in a positive way, you know? So I would say before we began writing a song, let us say, we would be reasoning for a good long time, just seeing where we had common experiences, shared ideas and approaches, so that by the time we started to work, we already had a certain affinity. We felt that we could work together and collaborate in a process, like a creative process.
Get up in a state of anger this morning, stretch on me yarn, look through me window, rain did a fall and some strong breeze blowing. So me a fish off in me window, then me sit down on the edge of me bed, scratch me head, take up your Bible, then me read what the Father said. We not fi beg, so jam me a fi sing and say, just not give up, just not give up. Fight of this a battle is a must. Just not give up, just not give up. You know the Father God me put me trust, Lord. Just not give up, just not give up. Fight of this a battle is a must. Not give up, just not give up. You know the Father God me put me trust.
Man needs a simple.
Blessed is he that come in the name of.
And then of course you're always thinking about the audience and the listeners. When you're trying to write a particular line in a song, you'll try and draw on your knowledge of Jamaican culture, Jamaican language, and what's happening on the street to see if you can phrase it in a way that would be relatable to the audience, you know. So that was always something we sought to do at that time. I mean, most of what we wrote was songs, mind you, but they would sometimes have a DJ section in them as well. That was usually my responsibility to come up with those lyrics, you know. But I also wasn't just on the songwriting side of things, because Ray kind of respected me, I think, as a creative person. So although he was the engineer and understood the technology we were working with, you know, which I was all new to me, but he would play things for me and I would give him my inputs, and he would always be pleased to have those inputs. And, you know, whether it be during the recording sessions or the arrangements or the mixes, you know, we worked together collaboratively. You know, that was a really enjoyable experience for me. I learned a lot. And I also, just the whole creative aspect of that, those were some wonderful times for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, you speak towards the collaborative effort. I find it to be very interesting, especially the way the music industry has shifted, particularly when we're thinking about collaboration and artists and other persons who are in the room and lending ideas. Do you find that the music industry shift today where maybe persons want to be more individualistic when they are creating music or creating content? How do you feel that that shift may or may not impact their creativity in terms of making a more brilliant song when you have more minds in the room that can contribute?
Yeah, it's hard to generalize, Rachel, because there are some songwriters who have created masterful works on their own. You know, Stevie Wonder, for example, I think most of the stuff he has done, well, you know, he did it on his own. There were other collaborations he worked with Third World, for example, Try Your Love and all of that. But if you look at his catalog of work, most of it, I think, is written by Stevie Wonder. On the other hand, you have Lennon and McCartney of the Beatles, and who, although they did some things individually, they always published them as being joint, but many of the things were written together. So, and you know, the Rolling Stones, you have Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, who similar, you know. The point I'm really trying to make is I don't think there's any one size fits all approach to things. There are some things that work really well when you have multiple minds, everybody vibing, everybody feeding off of each other's creative energy, and you produce something wonderful from that. And then there's somebody that just has an inspiring thought he or she develops on their own and produces something magical as well. It can work both ways. And if you even go back to classical music, you know, Beethoven, Mozart and Bach and those guys, they were writing on their own. And those pieces of music have stood the test of time and are still very influential today. So I don't think there's only one approach to this, you know. There are merits in both things, and certain things probably lend themselves to collaborations. You know, if you're approaching it as a project, I'm thinking of things like We Are the World and all those songs which had multiple artists and no doubt multiple songwriters worked on them too, I would think. But as I said, there are other great pieces of work that were done on, you know, written by people on their own.
On their own.
Yeah.
So, speaking to you, talking about different artists who can either have a collaborative effort and it's an amazing experience, and then those who can stand the test of time with their body of work that they've written by themselves. Particularly for you, how did you write a song that feels specifically tailored to an artist's unique voice while keeping it structurally grounded enough to win Jamaica Music Awards?
Right. Well, as a songwriter, sounds like a grandiose term to use for myself, but as somebody who's written quite a lot of music in the course of my life, you're very attuned to what it is you're working on. So, for example, I've written quite a lot of political music. When Peter Bunting was running for the first time against Hugh Shearer in Southeast Clarendon, a seat that the PNP had never won before, I wrote his campaign song. Not only wrote it, I performed it. In the studio, Ray recorded it, and it was a big tune in Southeast Clarendon, and he won the seat, And I've done other campaign songs right through as well. So, when you're doing that, you're, as a creative person, you're thinking about a political audience, a voter, and the candidate who you're trying to get across as being somebody to support. So you're writing your lyrics around that. And often with those kind of songs, I would use draw on a melody from the Jamaican folk tradition, or quasi folk tradition, a Stanley and the Turbines hit, or something from Hill and Gully Ride, or whatever it might be, where that everybody knows that. They may not know where it comes from, but they know that particular lick or that particular phrase, musical phrase. So that's one type. When you're doing something with let us say with an artist like Richie Stephens, who has a strong R&B background to him, although obviously he's a Jamaican reggae singer, dancehall singer, but he has a voice that can handle R&B type material. So writing for him now, you're looking at melodies that might be a bit more adventurous, a bit more sophisticated, a bit more challenging vocally, because he has the vocal capacity to do that. So from the melodic side of it, it's a bigger range, it can be more sophisticated or at least more challenging, because he has the chops to deliver that. He has a song on his recent album. One of the songs is called All I Need, was a song that he and I we wrote. I don't know who else is on it. Ray may be in it too. I don't remember, but I know I was part of that song, which is an R&B song, and it's funny because we did that in the 90s, and then 20 years later almost, or whatever, he was putting together this album. He remembered that song and asked Ray if he could put it on the album, and Ray said sure, and I think some additional arrangements were done to make it more contemporary sounding, because it had obviously been recorded long ago, and refreshing it.
Shining bright, baby, can you see? Lately you've been thinking you're just a friend of mine. Girl, I wanna prove it, I never wasted time. No, I'm not a dreamer, but I make your dreams come true. Now I realize, girl, all I need is you.
So writing is around knowing the artist you're writing for and their image, what they'd be comfortable singing about, what kind of issues you can imagine them singing about. Some artists, you can't conceive of them singing about certain subject matter because it would just not fit them.
Sure.
So you have to have those kind of nuanced sensibilities so that you can, tailor the writing to achieve a product which works for the artist. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, especially tailoring something that works for the artist.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, Richie Stephens, another one of my favorites.
Big up, Richie. Yeah, man.
Yes. So actually, at this portion, I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Radhika Myers.
Yes, Radhika. Come in at the hot
Big up
seat.
your nice, clean self, girl.
So, I sat and I listened to you and Rachel speak about the impact of dancehall, how it emerged in the 90s. And that's when you realize that it actually had international potential. Historically, Jamaican creatives has faced several structural vulnerabilities regarding contracts, publishing, and intellectual property. You've routinely stepped in to assist artists both financially and legally. Share with me, how can emerging artists better leverage legal literacy to protect their independent brands from exploitation?
Well, I think knowledge is very important, So as an artist, and especially as a creative artist, meaning an artist who's perhaps singing your own material, so that the copyright in what you're singing is, you have a stake in that. That is really your equity in your career right there. Apart from your image and your brand, which is another aspect of it, but the actual material that you're producing or writing to perform is really the value, the long-term value, because the Copyright Act protects that from being exploited without being paid for. And it protects it for your entire lifetime and a long time after your death, for the benefit of, your children or who you leave behind. So it's important to have a knowledge of how that works. You don't have to have a sophisticated understanding of it, but essentially copyright arises automatically in our system once you are the author of the work, the writer of the work. So what's important is being able to prove that you were and when, and there are different techniques for doing that. There's the old, what a poor man copyright, that when you've written something, it's on a cassette, you put it in an envelope, seal it, and mail it to yourself by registered mail. So you have and then you don't open it, obviously, you keep it there, but it will have a stamp, an official date stamp as to, so if anybody says they had written it at such a date, you can say, no, well, look, this was when I did that. So those things still exist. I don't know if they're still being used, but essentially, though, it's protecting yourself is about taking the time to learn about the industry and how it works. It's not difficult to do it with the internet today. You don't have to go into a library or buy big textbooks. You can get that information if you're interested in it. And then, of course, if your career is moving in a positive direction, you may want to get somebody in your team who can advise you appropriately on matters which may have a lasting impact on you. So, for example, publishing arrangements, which are exploitation of the copyright in the music. Those are important contracts to understand, because our musical history is full of examples of persons who were ripped off, essentially, because they didn't know what they were really doing when they signed as young artists before them bus, usually, know, and many have suffered terribly as a result of that. So it is important, I think, to have reputable persons who are regarded as trustworthy as well. You don't want to put yourself in the hands of somebody who may not be looking after your interests, but are looking after their own. So these are things I think I would say to any emerging artist,
And that is some really good advice. It's always important to know whatever business it is that you're in. So even when you have that trusted person in your camp, you yourself have that knowledge, so you can protect yourself to say, all right, this person that I've employed is actually doing the right thing and they're not trying to rip me off. Because that's one of the difficulties that you would have spoken to just now. So share with me, what is a hard truth that you've learned about the business of music in Jamaica?
Well, Jamaican music emerged, in a unique way, and it didn't follow the same development patterns of some of the major markets. So if you're looking at, for example, the US or let us say the UK as two major music markets, those countries always had the support infrastructure for the music industry, meaning they had publishing companies from the get-go. From classical music times, music publishing has been a thing. So they had all that. They had the lawyers and they had the accountants that worked for those, and then the recording companies that were, signing artists and selling millions of records, so they had that infrastructure. So any artist emerging there would have that around them. In Jamaica, it was totally different. I mean, our music industry didn't really have any of that. What we had was the amazing culture of Jamaica, language of Jamaica, musical traditions of Jamaica, from coming out of the folk music, which we really need to rediscover and promote, because it's a huge genre of very important material. And if I big up people like Oliver Lewin and others who dedicated themselves to that, coming through to Mento and Calypso, and then into the early rocksteady era, ska first, then rocksteady, and so on. These were things that just evolved out of the people, out of many of our music practitioners in those days probably didn't have a lot of education, certainly wouldn't have had access to lawyers or accountants, and even the people who were doing the business side of it in those days were themselves, they hadn't come into it with the exposure of how it worked internationally. So they were doing their own thing in their own way. So I think that evolution has been a mixed bag for Jamaica. I think there have been negative aspects to that, where we have suffered in the sense that some of what was due to us we have not ever received because we didn't look after ourselves properly. When all that music started to become popular internationally, and then there was real money to be made in it, the necessary proprietary work hadn't been done, so that not everybody who should have earned from it ended up earning from it. On the other hand, the informality of our industry and the lack of government interference in it, I think, could also be said to have helped it to evolve organically in the way that it did, where it's so fresh, it's so revolutionary, it's so hip, it's so edgy, because it's all just coming out of the culture and traditions of the way we do music, which is kind of different to everywhere else. So, again, with many things in life, it's not all good and all bad. There are good and bad aspects of the way things are and were. But certainly today, I think, where our music is recognized across the globe. Although, as I've said, we've to some extent lost our way in keeping control of it commercially and so on. But there's no excuse now, I think, for an artist to not put themselves in a reasonably protected situation in terms of access to knowledge, at least, and then, moving from there so that they don't make some of the errors that were made in the distant past.
Listeners, let's take a quick commercial break. Don't change the frequency.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dennis Howard, ethnomusicologist and the program coordinator for the Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management BA degree at the University of the West Indies, Mona. The sound systems like Duke Reid and Sir Coxsone and King Edwards started to do specials or dub plates of R&B music in a Jamaican style. Two of the first songs was Till the End of Time, Bunny and Scully, and also Lollipop Girl by the Jiving Juniors, who was led by Herman Sang and Derek Harriott. Out of that, the producers and the sound system operators, including Edward Seaga at the time, started to professionally record songs, and one of the first professionally recorded song, which was recorded in Ray Hitchens' book, The Vibes Merchant, was the song Boogie in My Bones, which was done at one of the radio studios with Graham Goodall, an Australian engineer, at the helm. So out of that, we started our music industry, which basically was a direct influence of the sound system culture that was big at the time in the inner cities of Jamaica. Invest in the rhythm, but remember, own the rights. This is Dr. Howard for the Creative Frequency Podcast.
Wow, that was a great deep dive on the music industry from Dr. Dennis Howard. Jamaica's musical impact knows no bounds and touches every shore. Now, let's hear more from Radhika and Mr. Mark Golden.
And that is so correct. And some of these issues are, as you said, we still have these issues happening, especially with the introduction of artificial intelligence.
Boy.
It has changed the whole landscape of what this Copyright Act now means, because what does the artist own versus what is actually the property of artificial intelligence? But that's a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
Speaking of a whole other ball game, you would have touched on the legislative aspect on helping the music industry to emerge. Your legislative track record is deeply historic. As the Minister of Justice, you guided the 2015 decriminalization of marijuana, which directly impacted the Rastafarian community and the local creative economy. Looking forward, what structural cultural policies do you believe Jamaica must usher in to officially preserve the history, heritage, and physical legacy of reggae music?
That's a really profound question. Before I launch into it, one thing I would also mention was when I was Minister of Justice, I assisted the Industry and Commerce Ministry with amending the Copyright Act to extend the life of copyright of sound recordings. And that was very much motivated by my own love for the Jamaican catalog, for want of a better word, of music that had been developed, especially during the 60s and early 70s. You know, the Alton Ellises, the Melodians, Cornell Campbell, and the Techniques, and all, you know, so many, which were all going to be falling out of copyright, which would have meant that they could have been sampled for free. And, you know, and a lot of those rhythms that were developed and that those songs were recorded on Studio One and Trojan and all the rest of them, I mean, those were also very valuable. So we amended the Copyright Act to extend quite substantially the duration of copyright retroactively to whenever it was originally created. And I'm quite pleased that we did that. Now, in terms of going forward and Jamaica really leveraging its cultural weight and its cultural potential, you know, first of all, well, you mentioned the ganja industry. And I mean, the ganja industry has been struggling because the government, I think, dropped the ball quite badly when they took it over in 2016. And the industry has really struggled to keep going. The investors have had a really hard time. The small farmers were largely excluded from it, which was never the intent. I know that in recent times we've been seeing some progress, and I'm looking forward to that continuing. So I'm hopeful that the industry can have a sort of fresh wind of development around that, and it needs to be as inclusive as possible for grassroots ganja farmers who really kept the industry and helped to build brand Jamaica around ganja in a century of prohibition. You know, they're the ones who suffered, you know, being raided, arrested, locked up, etc. So justice demands that they be given the opportunity to participate in the growth of the industry. But apart from the ganja side of it too, the Rasta culture needs to be given its props. You know, the Rastafari community want legislation and constitutional reform that recognizes them and their cultural heritage and cultural properties, you know, and I think that that is important because Jamaica's the internationalization of Jamaican music really was carried on the backs of artists who are dedicated Rasta men and women. You know, you're talking about, as I said, the Wailers, you know, Bonnie, Bob, Peter, you know, Burning Spear, etc., etc. So, and that has been a source of attractiveness. The world embrace the liberty of Rasta, the message of oneness, of peace, of treating each other with respect, of living naturally with the environment, protecting the environment, sustainability. These are tenets of Rasta liberty, which are so relevant, increasingly relevant as the world consumes itself with the massive expansion of populations and consumerism, etc. So, you know, the Rasta part of the music is very important and needs to be protected. And then I would say the Jamaican language, which is another aspect of this thing. We haven't got it right. You know, we have a language which evolved naturally out of our brutal history, but is enmeshed in the classism, racism of our society, so that if you speak a certain way, you're regarded by persons who have had opportunities that you may not have had as being somehow, you know, less. And it's crazy. And even in the way the education system is structured, where we have underperforming primary schools, because the whole assumption of the system is that everybody's coming out of a home where standard English is spoken. And that simply is not the case for many, 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 many people. For many, many, many people coming, Jamaican is spoken at home. Jamaican is spoken in the community. And increasingly, Jamaican is spoken on the radio and so on. So we have to accept that that's a reality, recognize our language as being valuable. It's a valuable cultural asset. It's an extremely expressive language. It's attractive to people, want to learn it and want to become more fluent in it. And we need to use it as a tool. I'm not suggesting, and I don't want anybody to say that I'm suggesting, I am not suggesting the abandonment of standard English. To the contrary, I'm speaking to you today largely in standard English.
Right.
You know, standard English has an important role to play. It's an international language. Chinese want to learn it. You know, Indians use it. Europeans most of them have it as a second language, you know, so it's valuable to Jamaica.
Right.
And we must be proficient in it. But what we must not do is ignore the value of our own language and the role that our language can play in helping our people to become fluent in standard English. Because typically, in other countries, the home language is used to help young children emerge into fluency in the official language, because that they're comfortable with their home language and they can pick up on things, and it can be taught. English needs to be taught like a second language to a lot of our people, because that's what it is.
Right.
So I'm just going on a bit about this because I see this as a sort of frontier of human rights and social justice issues which Jamaica has not got to grips with, and it affects our court system, it affects the delivery of government services, it affects people who who have to deal with all formal institutions which operate in standard English. People who are not comfortable in standard English are at a disadvantage, and that to me is wrong. This is Jamaica. If they're speaking Jamaican, they should not be at a disadvantage. There should be no disadvantage to them. So that's an area I'm interested to see how we can move things along. And the UWI, with the Jamaican Language Unit, has done some tremendous work in preparing Jamaica, if we would embrace their work, for this transition. But it's not yet accepted by the powers that be.
Largely, what I'm getting from what you're saying here is really the importance around managing and preservation of our legacies, of our culture. And I'm so happy that you brought up the issue of language. Just the other day, the ICS had the 6th annual Stuart Hall lecture with Professor Sonia Naya, who is dubbed the cultural doctor, who would have touched on this and spoken about the realities of language in schools and how teachers in the audience would have said that the students are not understanding them. They're not getting English. And the fact that you said that English needs to be taught as a second language, that was one of the points that was actually raised. A Spanish teacher had said that the students can't get to understand Spanish because they don't even understand the English. So that's an important reality that you brought up. And further on the leg of managing and preserving legacies, we had the 29th annual Bob Marley lecture in February. We had Isaac did that lecture. He was the guest lecturer. And he spoke on managing and preservation of legacies here in Jamaica. You would have spoken about his father, Big Youth, and basically how it is that we can ensure that we are preserving the legacies of reggae here in the 21st century. So it leads me to ask, how can the state ensure that the foundational archives of our musical pioneers are protected and monetized for the benefit of Jamaica rather than foreign collectors?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because we're part of an international commercial architecture. And in order to monetize what we have to integrate into that, because that's where the money is made. But we have to also ensure that we protect what we have. And part of protecting what we have is archiving it. So I talked about folk music, and there are lots of songs, folk songs and so on, which are dying out because nobody's aware of them or are not hearing them. We need to, I think, deliberately, engage with our music community to have our good, talented choral, our choirs and our music song groups, learn that material and record it for posterity so that we have that. We need to also make sure that some of the sound recordings that were made in studios in the 60s, say, which have been abandoned. I mean, Channel 1 is pretty much abandoned. Studio 1 is not functioning. I've seen videos where pieces of musical equipment that Tubby's used in his studio or in the sound, rotting out in a yard in the rain, and then some guy in England sees this or visits there because he has an interest, sees this piece of equipment, him get it and carry it back to England, fix it up, restore it, and it's worth God knows how much money. Because of the intrinsic value of it and the fact that it was Tubby's, who's a general. So we need to know the value of what we have. I don't think we really always appreciate that,
I don't think we do at all.
Yeah. And for us, if it's not new and shiny, and recently built, it's like it's old and it not have value. That is foolishness. Many assets appreciate with age in value, not depreciate. They may depreciate from an accounting perspective if they're not maintained in particular, but their value, their cultural value, can continually go up, especially if you market the culture the right way. So I mean, I think we have some superb cultural practitioners in Jamaica who understand this thing. Think of people like Dr. Deborah Hickling. There are many of them, you know, and we need to really get the benefit of their visions and come up with a way of ensuring that what we have is properly archived, properly respected, that the legal arrangements around them are fit for purpose, and then think about how we're going to market them to the world. You know, we have millions of tourists coming here every year. So, you know, there's plenty of opportunity to expose people to what we have. And then, of course, we're living in a communication age where, you know, you can be anywhere in the world and hear what we are saying. And so there's no excuse, really, for not doing this other than inertia or just laziness or a lack of understanding of what we have, the value of what we have.
Awesome stuff. And definitely, as I said before, I really feel like we don't value what we have. And working here at the ICS, also being a scholar of the culture and creative industry, you would have mentioned Dr. Deborah Hickling Gordon. She was my lecturer, you know, and she would have really shared some interesting insight on the CCI and where it actually needs to be in the 21st century. So I'm happy that you touch on that, because we really do need to manage and preserve our legacies better. When you talk about international appreciation, there was a function just the other day with the Brazil High Commissioner within the Faculty of Humanities and Education, and we were looking on the sound system culture, which I know Rachel is going to get into with you. And when I see how they have a little Jamaica in Brazil and the appreciation for this sound system culture that is actually dying here, and one of the guy, we talk about it in joking, he was literally crying because of how much he says he loved reggae. That's the guy who did the documentary. And it made me think in myself, they appreciate our music so much and see the need for preserving the records that they have, because one of the guys in the documentary, he showed his stacks of old vinyl records because he's saying that he has to preserve reggae. So when I see that sort of appreciation in Brazil, and I'm not really seeing it reflecting here, I know that there's work that actually needs to be done. And I'm hoping the state gets it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just Brazil. I mean, they have people totally dedicated to Jamaican culture, recognizing its worth, you know, in all sorts of unlikely places across Europe and across Asia, and no doubt in Africa too. So it's one of these things where, you know, you're rated abroad before you're rated a yard, you know, but yard need to wake up before it's all gone.
You've heard it here first. Yard need to wake up before it's all gone.
So, as Radhika mentioned with you regarding the sound system and protection and preservation of our history, legacy, and cultural signifiers that are really important to Jamaica itself, the traditional Jamaican sound system is the ultimate incubator of our global musical dominance. Yet dancehall culture frequently faces modern legislative pressures such as zoning laws, noise abatement acts, and urban/sonic gentrification. If you were steering the national cultural policy, what specific protections would you implement to safeguard the sound system as a living heritage institution?
Yeah, so there are different dimensions to that. There's a current sound system industry that is seeking to entertain and earn money from doing that as we speak, so to speak. And, they have the challenges of dealing with a regulatory system, which makes it very difficult for them. So you have, for example, the permitting process is leveraged by the police in some communities as a way of social control. And that can be very frustrating for entertainment practitioners and entrepreneurs in those communities, because they often are denied the opportunity to keep events, ostensibly, on the basis that there's issues in the community, that issues of potential violence and so on. Because I'm fairly close to this in my own constituency, I sometimes find there's a disconnect between what everyone understands to be happening on the ground and what the narrative being carried by the police is. So that's an issue that they have to deal with. And there's a real balance that has to be struck between the rights of citizens, of children who need to go to school, of people who have to go to work, and their right to rest and so on, and the entertainers and the people who want to be entertained who have a right to do that. And so how you balance that now, I think, is through things like entertainment zones. We need to have more of those regulated spaces that are available for having events at night. And that was a policy that we had developed when we were last in government. Damien Crawford was pioneering that. Minister Grange has recently kind of picked up on it. And so we're looking to see that roll out. And also, I would say, what can we do in spaces to deal with the acoustics and sound control, so that we can have, even in a fairly populated area, you can manage sound from an engineering perspective to control how far it leaks and so on. Have maybe, more Friday night and Saturday night, more liberal rules around time and that kind of thing. So it's a multiplicity of things. Now, on the older side, the heritage of dancehall sound now, that's a whole different thing. I mean, the sound system in Jamaica has been a critical part of our music industry from the early days. Dr. Hitchens, in his doctoral thesis, which was about sound recording techniques in Jamaica, made the point about the HART rediffusion box having a particular bass resonance, which became the norm for how we listen to music prior to the transistor radio. And that really fed into the way music was recorded and how music was consumed in the dancehall, where the heavier bass, which was not really understood or known outside of Jamaica, became part of how we consume music, which has now been transferred across the world, and everybody appreciates this now. That came out of us. So these are things that we need to recognize, and we should document them appropriately and, have our history. We need to have museums where those things are available for people who want to see what they look like and what they sound like. When I was growing up, it was the era of massive speaker boxes and the sound that created, the heavy bass that, you felt go through your body when it a lick, the horns where the treble was being carried and the mid-range and so on, and how all that was balanced out, and the use of echo and reverb to create a certain ambience that fed through into London. We have people like Jashaka and those sound systems, Saxon. Even I think Jashaka to this day is still playing that type of music. There's still a demand for it. So I may be wrong, but I think I read that somewhere. But my point really is the thing has evolved over time, and there are different important phases in its evolution, which we don't want to lose, because they're part of what explains why we are where we are. They're part of what explains how we got to where we are. Those things are really an important part of our cultural heritage and need to be protected.
Listeners, let's take a quick commercial break. See you soon.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dennis Howard, ethnomusicologist and the program coordinator for the Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management BA degree at the University of the West Indies, MONA. As we transition into the global streaming first environment, I think that we have sacrificed some of the organic kind of music making that we were used to. So it's not even just the streaming that has caused that, it's because of the technology and also because of the laws. Copyright is a big thing in Jamaica now, and trademark. And the body of our music, the majority of our music was done in a very communal way. In my book, The Creative Echo Chamber, we talk about the open domain environment in which Jamaican music was created. What that means is that we never regarded copyright. So it allowed us to borrow, to imitate, to copy, and out of that process, innovation like the version and the remix came about. Invest in the rhythm, but remember, own the rights. This is Dr. Howard for the Creative Frequency Podcast.
Wow, that was a great deep dive on the music industry from Dr. Dennis Howard. Now, let's return to the interview. I'm extremely intrigued by the museums because for some reason, as you're speaking, I'm literally building these images in my brain, like vividly. And I can't help but to think of the opening of the sound system. You open the door and you go inside and you're literally walking through, seeing the different decades of sound and how it's changed. And I would love to see something like that where it's preserved, but like real-time preserved. Mm-hmm. And then even as my co-host Radhika was mentioning, the vinyl records and even even like the change of music. And as you were speaking to how persons consume music and how all of that absolutely changes as technology grows. And I think that this is a perfect way to preserve Jamaican history and heritage because, as I said, growing up in Queens, New York, 14-year-old self, and I remember these sound systems in on the block parties at the end of the block. And of course, it was Jamaicans that put it together. I lived in St. Albans, so very heavily dense with Jamaicans. And it was so interesting to see that even though they weren't home, home was still with them. You know, they brought home with them.
They never left home behind.
Yeah.
And I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in the UK when I was a student, you know, and used to attend the raves, the blues dances and so on, you know, and those were just little microcosms of Jamaican culture, whereas outside was cold and snowing or whatever, in there was hot and the music was loud and, you know, they were playing, you know, the music that we all love. So yeah, our culture has gone far and wide. And the idea, for example, of a dancehall village, which is a historical journey through sound in Jamaica that starts with the early sounds and how they, you know, and then what they sounded like, the kind of music that was played on them, and then moves through the decades to where we are today. It would be a fascinating journey for anyone who has any interest in music. It's a concept that, you know, every good project has to begin with a good idea, right? So who knows? But I think that would be a very valuable addition to our tourist product, our, you know, what we offer the world for visitors, because sun, sand and sea is a commodity, you know, it's available in many places.
Yes.
But what we have to offer certainly is not culturally, right? We need to integrate this. When we talk about linkages between the tourism, and I mention tourism because it's an important industry and you have, you know, millions of visitors coming here every year, but the retention of their spend is very modest. And there's been some recently in the media, there's been some discussion about that. But it's not just about making them eat Jamaican food. That's critical. But let them consume Jamaican culture and get a love and a taste for it. So that when they go back, they might start to, you know, download and stream or whatever it is. And our artists benefit from that too. So, you know, it's a holistic approach that one has to have with these things. And I hope that we will, as a country, increasingly recognize the value of the culture. You know, it's not just about putting on events. You know, we're good at putting on events, and that's important. But there's nothing developmental about that. You know, that has no lasting impact. We need to start thinking about things that are going to help to grow our economy in a way that's sustainable and that leverages what we have developed indigenously here. Pay anybody any royalties for it. This is ours. They have to pay us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're absolutely right about that. I can vividly paint a picture. August 2006, I was in Japan, in Tokyo, and I was walking down the street, Harajuku, and I came across this Jamaican store run by a Japanese lady that did not speak a lick of English, but knew every single Jamaican song and was singing it to the T. And the thing is, at the time, I had some CDs that I burned some music, and I was like, well, you know what, I'm going to give this to you. She's like, really? I can have it? And I was like, yeah, I can burn more. But, you know, I was like, I want you to have it so you can play like the latest reggae music. But I think what you're speaking to, especially retention and retaining our cultural signifiers, that are extremely important, because there are many persons, as Radhika was saying, around the world, and as you were also saying, that experience Jamaica, love Jamaica, and then they are also utilizing as a form of commodity for their own usage. And I think that Jamaica should absolutely be able to have royalties in this way. You know, if that store in Japan is making money off of literally Jamaican heritage and Jamaican culture.
I mean, it's the world doesn't adequately protect cultural assets. Really, I think there's too much room for exploitation of other people's culture without paying for it. That's just a reality. But there are some areas where there is quite robust protection, and we need to make sure we're on top of those things. And there really needs to be for example, you're talking about a Ministry of Culture, that one could kind of anticipate, conceptualize an enforcement unit within that ministry, which is really the kind of police for Jamaican culture internationally, and who have developed expertise and are empowered and resourced to go and protect our our legacy, our rights, wherever they're being infringed, and develop a reputation for being serious about it. So, when you have that reputation, it's much cheaper to enforce, because when people realize you're looking at them, they back off. So it's a self-fulfilling thing, but we don't really have that right now.
There are other countries that are absolutely doing this. I couldn't help but to think of, like, for instance, with France and Champagne, and how that's very specific to their region, and you can't get it anywhere else. And when the Italians made it, they had to call it Prosecco. And then also their haute couture. Haute couture, same thing. It was something that was considered a form of their culture that needs to be protected. So every time you even hear the words haute couture, you know that it came from France and is very specific to their fashion.
And we have protected a few geographic indicators. Jamaica has done that, which is good, But at the same time, there are lots of instances of cultural appropriation for which we are not being paid and may never get paid. And, one has to kind of see, well, okay, that's a negative, but at the same time, it's a positive, because ultimately they're promoting your brand and they're promoting the value of what you have, and you're not paying them to do that either. So in a way, you kind of, as many things, there are two ways of looking at that. But certainly for the Japanese, they were one of the first countries to really get into our culture in an incredibly intense way. Who would have thought that Japan is so culturally unique in its own right and so far away from Jamaica, but there was something about the freshness of our thing and the excitement of it and the dancing moves and the DJ vibe and the sound system culture that they just took to, like it continues through to this day.
Right, absolutely. There's a huge love there for Jamaican culture. And I really appreciate the fact that you're speaking to also like balance and having an understanding of protection in this kind of way, which also brings me back to Kingston as well. So when we are looking at development and the need for protecting particular spaces, how would you say that we balance the logistical realities of a developing Kingston with the need to protect the sacred spaces where dancehall music is born and then experienced widely across Jamaica?
It begins with government policy. Government has to build into its planning policy the protection of these spaces. I have an example, a painful example, of a 19 Lower 2nd Street, which was one of the government yards in Trenchtown, and was the building where Bunny Whaler and Bob both lived for a number of years, with Bob's mom and Bunny's dad. And for many years, we've been trying to get that property to become a Whalers Museum, to celebrate the Whalers, because, they are such an important part of our legacy. A lot of work was put in to try and get this done, and it hasn't happened, and the building has more or less collapsed now. So it's very, very painful to me to see that this opportunity was lost. It really got no buy-in from the authorities, and it needed that support because there were some land use issues and there were certain letters that needed to be written to authorize certain things and what have you. But it was never given a chance to breathe. And so I'm citing that as an example of how off base we are, because that could have been a transformational asset for Trenchtown and become a very important part of what Jamaica has to offer visitors who are interested in our musical traditions, because there's a Bob Marley Museum, of course, but the Whalers Museum right in the heart of Trenchtown, and there's Trenchtown Culture Yard one road down. So, it's part of developing this series of relatable and related cultural assets that can become tours, that can be sold as tour packages to people to come in and do this. So we need to recognize, again, have the consciousness of it, and then build it into policy so that you can't just destroy a space which was once, a very important space in the development of our culture. You can't do that. That's not allowed. But we're not there yet.
I agree 100%. It absolutely matters to protect our spaces and things that are super culturally relevant to us, because once we're gone, how is the next generation supposed to remember where they came from?
Absolutely. And the value of what was created then with time continues to grow. There's something about the freshness, the authenticity, and the rootsiness of it that people, generation after generation, hearing it, love it. It resonates with them. It's impactful. And that's not likely to stop, because the way the world is moving, people are going to need that sort of thing for their own mental health and their own sense of balance. So it's very valuable. And if we don't protect it, it can disappear. Something that really needs to be considered more carefully by the powers that be.
Okay. Well, powers that be, I'm looking forward to seeing something implemented.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one day I'll get a chance.
Okay. So you know what? Actually, my co-host, Radhika, is going to come in and take over from here.
When you were speaking with Rachel just now, you would have spoken about, your advocacy for trying to get that Bunny Whalers Museum and how it fell through. In addition to that, you have passionately and repeatedly advocated in Parliament to officially confer the title of National Hero upon the legendary Bob Marley. Beyond the symbolic power of that designation, how does elevating a global musical icon to the highest tier of national honor shift how Jamaica values its creative industry?
Yeah, I think that's a very important dimension to it. And the Whalers Museum wasn't just Bunny, it was Bunny, Bob, and Peter, because that was the original Whalers. Of course, there was Beverly Kelso and Junior Brathwaite and so on, but the core of it was those three. Yeah, in terms of, I think in the same way that Barbados chose to make Rihanna a national hero in Barbados, it's because they understood that brand Barbados, what Barbados means to the world, would be enhanced by an association with a world figure like Rihanna. I mean, for us, we have a narrow conception of national heroes. They're either persons who were involved in armed conflict or political activity of some kind. But to my mind, if we were to embrace, and I think Bob Marley is at that status, internationally and locally. And I've also said Miss Lou, because of the importance of the Jamaican language and her role in bringing that forward, her catalogue of material around that, which was really pioneering and instrumental. I think that when Jamaica names those two people as national heroes, the whole country accepts that the culture is of tremendous value, because we have put on that pedestal two people who were cultural creators, in a broad sense. They weren't politicians. They weren't revolutionaries in a physical violence kind of warlike sense, though both of them were revolutionaries in their message and in what they delivered. So I think it would enhance the things we've been discussing today to elevate them to that status, because it would also, I think, and this podcast is about creativity, it would elevate the importance of creativity in the national consciousness and narrative, that two seminal creatives of Jamaica are being recognized for that. And they have been recognized internationally for that. But we haven't yet elevated our own consciousness to see that they deserve to be treated that way. So I think, this would be symbolically relevant, to the whole discussion that we've been having.
I can say an amen to that indeed. We need to elevate our consciousness to understand the importance of our culture. And once it is that the state reflects that, then, the layman can have an appreciation for just how valuable our culture is. And, we've been speaking a lot about you and advocating. How do you see this sort of advocacy aligning with your family's deep philanthropic legacy of social upliftment through the Sir John Golding Rehabilitation Center, formerly known as Mona Rehabilitation Foundation?
Well, that's a whole different dimension to my life and my family's legacy. My dad was Jamaica's first orthopedic surgeon and started that institution with others, but he was the main force behind that, and it's now named after him. He died in 1996. There is a connection with the culture because Israel Vibrations, who are highly respected and recognized group around in a reggae genre, came out of that center. They were polio victims who made it in through music, so there is that there is that connection with the culture there. But creative industries have always played a role in that center because it has produced woodwork, it has produced to make jewelry, Christmas cards, various crafts that help to support the center financially and were produced by persons with disabilities at the center. That's always been part of what we do there, and that continues to this day. Certainly the woodwork operation is still going, so there is that, yes.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much for that.
Listeners, let's take a quick commercial break. Don't change the frequency.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dennis Howard, ethnomusicologist and the program coordinator for the Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management BA degree at the University of the West Indies, Mona. At the ICS, we bridge the gap between the artistic vibe and the professional levels. We invite students to join us because the Caribbean is currently the epicenter of global creative shifts. If you want to be the architect of the next phase of our cultural economy, the Institute is where that foundation is built. Invest in the rhythm, but remember to own the rights. This is Dr. Howard for the Creative Frequency Podcast.
Dr. Dennis Howard's musical knowledge on Jamaica's music industry is so thorough. Listeners, if you join us at UE, you will experience this firsthand. Let's get back into the interview.
As we're winding down today's brilliant conversation, if you could just whisper 3 words of wisdom to your high school self right now before you have started your career journey, what would it be? And how would you encourage your high school self to overcome their biggest fear about the future?
The future does appear quite uncertain as we are on the cusp of the AI revolution, and it's hard to grasp and predict where that will take the world. But I believe that there will always be a need, a visceral, basic human need for human cultural and creative expressions to help reinforce our sense of who we are, our identity, our cultural location in the world, and so on. So I would say to any youngster, whatever your creative juices are, whatever the area where you feel that you can produce something that is unique or that others can't do it in the way you do it, don't ignore that. Develop that. See where it can take you. Because you'll get tremendous pleasure out of doing it because it's a basic part of who you are. And by nurturing it and exploring it, you're developing an essential aspect of your own identity. But also, it may become something which others will value and that you can help to monetize in some way down the road, or just use it for your own long-term personal reward, pleasure, peace of mind. So since we're on a podcast dealing with creativity, my message to the young people is, develop your own creativity, develop the areas. Let me tell you, it can be vast. It's not limited to music. It's not limited to art. It's not limited to cooking, I'm a commercial lawyer. And when I draft a contract, it's a creative process for me. How I word a provision, the language I use, what I say and what I don't say is very much a creative expression of part of who I am. So I'm saying, whatever it is you're doing, even if you're a footballer, how you kick the ball, how you control the ball, how you dribble, how you pass, your vision for the game is part of the, who you are creatively. So don't try to constrain the concept of creativity. It's wide-ranging, but it's vital to who we are and what we can become. And I would encourage all young people to explore that to the fullest, because I think that is a sustainable way of living.
Thank you so much for that. You've heard it here, students. Hone your creativity.
Mr. Golding, let's take time for chat. In this segment, each of our guests will tell us about their favorite Jamaican or Caribbean proverb or cultural reference. What is your favorite cultural reference or proverb?
I would say, what sweet nanny goat I go run them belly. That is one, because I've experienced that myself, overindulgence in something can come at a cost. So, balance is important. I would add that to your list. All right.
Okay.
Blessings.
All right. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us on the Creative Frequency podcast. It was such a pleasure to have you and to listen to your expertise and knowledge and your love for the dance hall and DJ and Jamaican culture at large.
Well, thank you both for having me and for the tremendous work. And thank you to Dr. Hitchens for putting this together. It's always a pleasure working with him. We've never worked in this particular way before, but I'm very grateful to all of you. Blessings, and to all the listeners, I hope you found it enjoyable to listen to the conversation we've had today.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Blessings, Radhika.
Join us in 2 weeks while we go off the cuff with 2-time Grammy-nominated artist, Runckus.
Creative culture, where the vibes meet the vision.
Special thank you to our guest, Mr. Mark Golden. Host, Rachel Fenderson and Radhika Myers. Contributor, Dr. Dennis Howard. And our sound engineer, Dr. Ray Hitchens. Musical selections produced and composed by Courtney Edwards, also known as Kingman. Our executive producer and editor, Rachel Ann Fenderson. And our ICS director, Dr. Dave Goss.
The Creative Frequency podcast is brought to you by the Institute of Caribbean Studies, ICS, under the umbrella of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona. You can catch us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you can catch us.
King